I'm Lisa Flood.
And I'm Jason Engelett, and welcome to Faith and Marriage Today.
And we'd like to welcome Father Paul West and Ian Durnan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, before we go anywhere with all the things we want to talk about, we really need to talk to you, Father Paul.
Sure.
You are a priest.
Correct.
In the Byzantine Rite. Around in these parts, we're typically Roman Catholic. Would you explain a little bit about the difference between the Byzantine Rite and the Roman Catholic Rite?
Okay, well, I think the glaring thing is I'm married, right? That's
Yes.
the glaring error. The glaring error. Yes. No, the glaring thing or difference. Yes, thank you. So, right. So what the idea of Byzantine Catholicism is essentially we were evangelized by Cyril and Methodius in the 9th century or so. So this is before the 1054 split, right? And so basically what happened was when there was this split, our people, specifically in the Byzantine Ruthenian tradition, which I'm in, we got stuck in this little swath of land in the Carpathian Mountains in between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, right? And so we basically remained unchanged. And so what happens is we look like we're Orthodox, quote unquote, with the vestments and the incense, the icon screens, all these things you might associate with a Greek or Russian Orthodox parish if you've ever seen one. However, we recognize the primacy of the Roman Pontiff. And so we are in full communion with the Church of Rome. So we have our own bishops, we have our own hierarchy, our own archbishops, but we do recognize the primacy of the Pope. So that's the big difference there. So we are in full communion. So our sacraments coincide with your sacraments. You can come to communion in one of our churches. We can go to communion in one of yours, and guys like me could even marry a Roman Catholic, and it's okay. So,
praise God. That was really fantastic. A little history right there. I appreciate that. But we have a great show today, and this is going to be a two-part show. So we're going to be talking about a great work of Springs in the Desert. We've had on the show before, we've talked about this. So we're coming at it from a perspective of today, bringing out your experience and your work in Springs in the Desert, both married and your experience in the work as what you've been doing. And so yes, we want to thank y'all so much for taking the time. So this is part one, and then the next episode we're actually going to bring your wives in and kind of get into their experience and also their work that they're doing with the ministry as well.
So I know you did a show in the past, which I did not see. So for those of our viewers who have not seen the initial show that we did, what is Springs in the Desert about?
Ian, do you want to take that one?
Ian, you want to take that?
No.
Yes, Springs in the Desert, it's just a beautiful group. There are a lot of us that are from different denominations, and Catholic. We have all of our Byzantine brothers and sisters. We're all there going through infertility. It's a very complex journey. There's a lot of fragility that you're experiencing as a couple. There's sometimes, I think, trauma, overwhelm. And we're trying to figure out, Lord, what is your calling for us in our marriage? How can we be fruitful? So a lot of it is done online. We have a lot of podcasts. There's gatherings online, retreats, lots of blogs. So it's just a great way for folks to get together and minister to each other and share on that journey in a deeper way and as to what the Lord is calling us to in our deeper relationship with Him and with our spouse.
So you've literally got people from all over the country reaching out to you, because I've never heard of any other ministry that's ministering to couples struggling with infertility. So this is awesome.
All over the world, actually. I see individuals or couples for spiritual direction, mostly over the phone or Zoom or what have you. But I actually see people from Ireland and Australia, actually. So it's amazing what we can do, like not only with technology, but to see what the need is of these Catholic couples. And they all pretty much say the same thing, regardless of what country they're coming from, what side of what ocean, is we have no support. We have no peers. We have no anything. Like, what can we do? And I was like, well, you've taken the first step. You're talking. So that's
help us also to identify what stands out, because I know things when someone thinks of infertility, they immediately go to the Pope Paul VI Institute. Have you all been there yet? Kind of a thing. They want to try to fix and try to offer suggestions on how to But what is it that Springs in the Desert offers versus something like a fertility doctor or something like that?
Well, this is something Ian and I have been talking about a lot lately. It's a reframing of the spirituality of like what it means, not even what it means to be fruitful, but what is fruitfulness. You know, and from a Catholic perspective, we have to reframe the whole thing, where it's not the progression of, okay, I get raised, I leave my house, I get married, we have kids, and that's the boom. You know, you get married, and that's fruitfulness as children. No. If we back that up, we have to say, what does that say about you then? You're just like second place, you're second prize, right? A marriage is just a, consolation. It's like, no, it's in our marriages. The fruitfulness comes from the sacramental marriage and the couple and their love rooted in Jesus Christ. And then anything that comes from there is the first fruits of a life in Jesus Christ. So that's,
That's really beautiful, the way you explain that, because it's just occurring to me that I have friends who maybe have one child or maybe two children, and they count the pew with the kids, filled with 8 kids, and feel a little bit like, well, they're not more faithful than I am. Like that's not a badge of honor to have more kids. But there is a little woundedness in there thinking, well, why do I not have what they have?
Yeah, we can't quantify an intangible mystery, right?
Right.
How do you do that? You can't.
Like, children are a gift, and I think there's a lot in our culture, I think in American culture, where we think we have control. Just some of the topics that kind of cross our minds are things like, family planning. It's like, so you're assuming that you know what's going to happen.
Right.
It's like, we assume, and we kind of, we make those assumptions or try to make plans, but we don't know what the Lord has in store for us. And I think a big crux of the message of Springs in the Desert is, we have a good God, a loving Father, and it's a broken world, and we don't know what exactly His blessings will be, but this journey of infertility, it's meant to bring out graces, and there is a spiritual fatherhood and a spiritual motherhood that's out there that's needed in the world, and you're being shaped in this different way. And you're right, when you're at church, you might be counting the children, or as a man, sometimes I see men with their children, and I'm like, oh, that'd be so cute. I would love to have a child, to sit on my lap and squeeze their little cheeks and love them. But that's not what the Lord has in store. He's shaping me for something different on my mission that I'm living.
This is such a beautiful thing that y'all are sharing and you're bringing up, because like this is the going back to the basics of like what this is all about. Like almost like we need to talk about this in marriage prep, right? Like when the couples are coming together, because the question is like, well, how many kids y'all want to have? It's like there's like, well, I want to have this many kids. I'm like, okay, that's nice to kind of maybe think about that, but like let's maybe phrase that better, or at least that you want them to answer as many as the good Lord wants to give me. And if that's 0 or 30, that's, what I'm saying, like whatever. But the point is that you come at it from a perspective like, this is, I don't know, like, I guess I'm saying it like this, like, Elise and I, she passed almost 3 years ago in August, my wife. And this idea that like, we talked about, being able to hold hands when we're old and gray, rocking on the rockers, and reminiscing on the years gone by. But that never happened. That didn't happen for us. That wasn't how it worked out for us. But it's like, that's not the tragedy. The tragedy would have been that we got to that point, but we did marriage our way. We sought to live out our marriage, our yes together the way that we wanted to, and we didn't seek to try to find what God's plan and God's will was for us. So that's, I think, kind of rephrasing. We really need to look at marriage, family, everything, coming back to what is it that God wants. And a lot of times I feel like we just take these plans of ours and we go to God at best and say, hey, can you rubber stamp this real quick? Because I want this to work out. And then the Lord has a different plan. We don't know this amazing plan, but He is a good Father who's, through our sufferings, He's got something amazing going through, and He shows that with His Son.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that speaks to that point of like rooting not only our marriages, but like ourselves, right?
Yes.
In this idea of Jesus Christ, right? This idea that, like St. Paul says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, right? And that, we need to take that seriously. That's like step one.
Yeah.
Okay, if we take that serious as an individual, then we bring that seriousness into our marriages, right? Then that seriousness will sort of permeate every part of our existence. And then the question is not, or should really never be like, oh, how many kids do you want to have, right? Because the byproduct of this union is children. It's like, well, no, we have to once again reframe. An openness to life, an openness to God's will is not well, how many kids do you want to have? It's an openness to life, and you can keep life, sanctified. You can keep it holy. You can keep it open, and not have to have this conversation, right? Just about a numeric value, right? For instance, for me, like if I weren't open to, the will of the Lord and God's voice, I wouldn't be here talking with you, but also I wouldn't be a priest and have this undeserved honor and blessing that I have. I would still be miserable where I was, complaining to my wife 6 times a day about how much I hated my job. Now I only do it twice a day. No, so that's the,
Praise God. Well, let's jump in. How did y'all get into this particular apostolate, this work that y'all do in Springs in the Desert? Ian?
Certainly. It was really through my wife, Cassie. I call her, if I could use one word to describe her, it would definitely be resourceful. She's a woman that, she was going through infertility. The first 5 years of our marriage, she was going through it really by herself. And it's a hard admission to make as a man because I saw her struggle. She was going through overwhelm. She was going through that grief, and I didn't know how to connect with it. I just thought, I already have a complex relationship with the Lord. If I touch that, I'm in a downward spot, corkscrew drive, and it's not going to be good. And she had started looking for a lot of support online, Facebook groups, that sort of thing, articles, blogs, but there wasn't the spiritual side. So, my wife Cassie, she has a degree in theology, so it was always super important for her to journey with the Lord, and she wasn't getting that online. And one day she says, "Hey, I read this really great article in this, from this group called Springs in the Desert," and that was the beginning. And of so many great conversations that we started having, where I started learning more of, okay, so my wife's not the only one going through some of these complex feelings. There are other women, and they're bringing up, what does the Lord have to say, and who else in the Bible, whose life can speak to the lessons that can be learned. So it was just a really deep conversation that I started getting into with my wife, and that's how I drew more into the ministry. And then I met James Kleinig. He also has a podcast for the men, and so that was really great, getting to share my story and to see what that journey looks like together as we're discovering the richness and the creative ways that the gospel has messages for us. That's how it captured my heart, and that's how I'm here today.
Ian, do you think it's very common, though, that the women are journeying in this issue, this struggle, for a long time before their husbands come along? Don't you think that's common?
Oh, yes, definitely. I think the big problem with it, is a lot of men out there, we know basic emotions. I call it just men need to really understand, sometimes men can be angry, but inside they're actually hurting, or they're, they feel a little bit envious, but it comes out as anger. And so, man, I'm just mad, At least that's the type of mentality I kind of came from, and I see a lot of men that a lot of men have. But there are a lot more complex emotions that come about because of infertility. You have things like distress, helplessness, overwhelm, depression, grief. Those are they are emotions made of other emotions. And if you don't sit back and begin to kind of label what some of your basic emotions are, but some of these and the reasons behind some of those emotions, then you're just going to be overwhelmed. And I think that's where men withdraw. There's so many comforts in our society. There's beer, there's a lot of great shows on Netflix that you can binge watch.
So many.
And there's so many, right? Many. And you begin to pour your manhood, that energy into comforts. When in fact, you need to be comforted. You need to be comforted as a man. And once, it's like the idea when you're on a passenger jet, and if the oxygen masks come down, you need to put that oxygen mask on yourself before you can help someone else. And I realize that our calling as men is that idea of putting the oxygen mask on is, what am I experiencing right now? What is this emotion? Why am I feeling it? And what positive things can I do with it? And in turn, I can turn to my wife and say, what is she going through right now? Because how is it? When you're married, typically you can almost finish each other's sentences. You know each other's hobbies, and how can you start to attune to your spouse and say, I think I know what you're feeling right now. Is it this? And you begin that dialogue of naming it to taming it, naming it to tame it. And together you're able to find more constructive ways of dealing with these very complex emotions, and to be careful about the triggers that can happen. You know, I've grown so much more aware of the different types of infertility. You know, the folks who have 1 child or 2 children, but they thought they were going to have a minimum of 5. And that has been just very eye-opening to me to realize men, we have so much to offer our wives. We are the voice of God to them if we pray, if we really grow in humility and allow the gospel and that good news to come into our hearts and to journey with our wives. And when you are doing that, I think you're able to come up with a lot more very positive solutions. But the solution, that's the other thing too, I think in the complexity, the solution is not, oh, well, will we have a child and, you know, the child will be the solution. No, the solution is a deeper unity in your marriage, and a deeper unity with the will of the Lord.
That's beautiful. Father Paul, you're bringing into this ministry. How did that happen?
Oh, okay. Well, this is another one of those shoves of the Holy Spirit, you know, completely out of my hands. Yeah. I hear that. Yes. So when I was in seminary, I was voluntold that I was going to be writing for our eparchial diocesan. It's like kind of the equivalent. So for our eparchial newspaper, right, the Eastern Catholic Life, and so I was writing for several years. This was like up to my 3rd year, and my articles were in the newspaper next to this woman named Ann Kossuth, who we didn't know at the time was the founder of, one of the co-founders of Springs in the Desert. And so I knew her through her articles, and my wife knew her through her articles, but we really didn't know much about.
By the way, just have to say that.
Who, Ann or my wife? Which one?
Both. I know Ann very well. She's fantastic. So just a little props out for Ann for all the great work that she's doing.
And so we knew her through her articles, and then when I just finished my 3rd year of seminary, and our process is usually if you are decidedly married or have chosen to remain celibate, your bishop will ordain you to the diaconate, and that's when that decision has to be made. Are you going to remain celibate or, you know, live the married life? And so, being already in a quite lengthy committed marriage, my bishop's like, we're going to ordain you right away, and I'm going to send you to this parish in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and that's where you're going to be a deacon for the summer. And it just so happens that Ann Kossuth was a parishioner at St. Anne's in Harrisburg, and she and my wife got to talking, and she and I were like, so you're my page partner, okay? You know, and we got to talking, and we've been involved in the ministry ever since. So it was a beautiful.
Praise God.
Yeah, it's a beautiful.
Sometimes the Lord makes it so clear what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's no option. You really can't say no. So.
Well, from a ministry perspective, Father Paul, how would you encourage those who are in ministry to tend to the hearts of men and women who are struggling, but specifically the men? Let's start there.
Yeah, that's a difficult question.
I
That's
know.
a very like multi-layered question. But I think the most important thing, and I find this when a lot of people come to me, they just say like, well, you know, Father, you're not afraid to say the words that I need to hear, but not in a like placating sort of way. In a like, don't be afraid of like the words like, you know, infertility or miscarriage or pain or suffering or sadness. Like, just don't be afraid to take it head on, because right away as men, we want to, you know, regardless if you're a priest or not a priest, as men, we just want to like solve the problem, right? Because that's what we're going to do. But if we look back to the book of Genesis, you know, from the very beginning of like the archetype of marriage with Adam and Eve, immediately Adam as man was faced with a problem he couldn't solve, right? He couldn't solve that problem. But yet, he and Eve had to walk that road together. So if we go back to that like ancient, you know, prehistorical archetype of Adam and Eve and look at that, that's the thing. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to make it happen. All we know is we have to. And so whether we're in, you know, a lay ministry or a priestly ministry, or, you know, even struggling with our faith, the first step is just not being afraid to have those honest, open conversations and being sort of comfortable in the uncomfortable silence. And from there, that's when all of these things grow and the Holy Spirit starts to churn. And when we're quiet and when we're just okay to sit in this uncomfortable sadness, we start healing. right? It's like, you can't, if you have a wound on your hand, like if you cut yourself, if you keep poking it and hitting it, it's only gonna make it worse.
Right.
But if you just let it sit for a while, let it alone, it'll start to kind of scab, and it won't be perfect.
Right.
It needs a lot of care, but it will start to heal. And then ultimately, you will be left with some scar tissue for sure, but you can still live a beautiful, healthy, wonderful life with a lot of care and a lot of comfort.
When I hear the story of Adam and Eve, I just think of the struggle that where Adam just remains silent in the moment of his challenge, right? The tempter comes in and he just remains silent to the temptations, to the challenges, and what he could have done is, I think the antidote is the Our Father, right? Like turning to the Our Father and turning to God and for this moment of challenge and finding that grace. So I think that must be something very obviously difficult for all of us men, specifically I think we can talk as guys, but just be able to say that, like, when these challenges come, to be able to recognize that we need to ask for help. I remember whenever Elise and I, when we first were diagnosed with cancer, I remember a good friend of mine, Deacon Mark Coudrain, he said to me at the very beginning, he said, let people help you. Like he was very aware of that because of his struggle with his wife's health and things like that, and the challenges of raising children, stuff like that during that time. And he was just very clear, like this moment of like, let people help you. And it was an encouragement that, like, I can't do this. I realize, okay, well, I can't do the medical thing, so I tap out on the doctors, and you doctors, you take care of it. But then there's other areas of my life that the emotional stress, the spiritual stress, all these things in my life that, like, I can't Rambo this thing. I can't go it alone on any part of my life, that I need to be able to turn and ask for that help. So speak into that for me, please.
Do you want to take that one?
Certainly. I definitely, the vulnerability of infertility.
Yeah.
That, I think, is one of the most difficult things for men to deal with for so much of us, because a lot of American values are, we value our independence. We value that ability, like, no, I'll find it, or I'll suck it up, buttercup, or I'll ignore it and just work through, push through that feeling, that uncomfortableness, everything's gonna be fine. And we are called for a vulnerability with the Lord.
Yeah.
We open up into that intimacy with Him, and when we open up in vulnerability to others for support, because yes, we have our spiritual viewpoint of what's happening. There's the emotional. There's your physical, what you're going through. That takes a big toll. That's in a shock. It's a trauma, and it's very overwhelming. And you need that support system to help you, to breathe through it, to pray through it. But I think one of the biggest revelations for me in my personal journey with going through infertility with my wife was I needed to be healed first in order to turn around and help my wife and her. And in order for me to receive healing, I needed to go to men's groups. I needed to find spiritual advisement. I needed to be looking up articles. I needed to be learning about psychology and letting that help bring that in with my spirituality. And the Lord has given me so much healing through that. But we have to, how is it you're just relaxing into it and just saying, Lord, what do you have for me today? I'm showing up to this men's group. I know there's going to be some seed you're going to leave to me in my hand that I can plant in my heart. And over time, every time you read an article or you have a conversation with someone who's going through what you're going through, they're sharing their wounds with you, you're sharing your wounds, and sometimes you're like, wait, how did you heal from that? How did you get through such a challenging? And I think that's what's so engaging for men, is that when you see the great feats, and you're like, hey, you built that all yourself? Like, oh, you caught that giant fish? Tell me, how did you do it?
Right.
And it's very engaging, and I think that's the spark that we hope to bring with infertility, is that men can see other men, and other couples can see other couples with healing and say, how did you do that? So there is hope for me, even though I'm in this overwhelming, difficult, dark place. You're telling me that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I just find that very special about how the Lord, when we reach for Him in vulnerability and opening up to Him, that He reaches to us.
And that
well.
response is a real fruitfulness in the marriage.
Amen.
Like, it's that walk in the Lord together, because the goal of marriage to begin with is to get to heaven, right? So there's going to be, life is going to happen. And God is calling us to walk with His grace and His love together and face these storms together, locking our eyes on Jesus.
Amen.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's something, you know, you hit on, and we each as men, you know, we're strong American individuals, right? And we are the homestead, right? But you know, we each have our own experiences with this. So for me, when we were, you know, through our journey of infertility, we went into our marriage knowing that it was going to be very difficult, if not like impossible, for us to conceive. And you know, through the grace of God, we ended up conceiving our daughter. And I remember, like, I'm really good at like bottling everything up, right? And closing that lid so tight that Andre the Giant couldn't open it, you know? Right. So tight, right? And I was just so tight and so bottled up and so quiet the whole time, and you know, dealing with my own anxieties and depression and things I didn't even know I was dealing with right at the time. And so it was just like a mess for me, and I was having all kinds of like stomach problems and all these things, you know, from the stress, which I didn't even know I was dealing with because I was so closed off. And then we had at our daughter's baptism, like something cracked in me. Like I'd like to say like a glow stick, but that's too pretty. It just like kind of the bottle broke, right? The bottle exploded under the pressure, and then everything slowly started opening up, and I kind of realized that my whole life had been centered on I want to say the wrong thing, but that Christ really wasn't there. Like he was there, but I wasn't letting him in, right? And so that's the thing. And then I started letting him in, and all of a sudden, you know, as you know, the pressure cooker of, well, I'm feeling this call to the priesthood and all these things in a seminary, and all these things grew, and it's more pressure. I realized that pressure was like a star, you know, that was about to go supernova, that like where it's like creating these heavier and heavier elements, and you know, it's forging that relationship in Jesus Christ. And I think, you know, the struggle ultimately has made me, I'll be arrogant enough to say, has made me a better man, or at least on the path to becoming a better man, you know. And our marriage is stronger, you know, our relationship is stronger, our faith is stronger, and you know, also I think mostly, you know, our courage has become stronger to be able to talk about these things freely, because for a long time, both my wife and I, we never really talked about it. Now here we are on TV and all over the internet, and having retreats flying all over the country. It's like, what happened? You know?
That is a wonderful place for us to close this conversation before we have our second conversation. That's all the time we have, but we are going to continue this conversation in our next episode with Father Paul's wife, Alyssa West, and Ian's wife, Cassie Durnan. Again, thank you both for being with us. To learn more about the great work of Springs in the Desert, go to springsinthedesert.org.
That's our show for today. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or to learn more, go to faithandmarriage.org. Also, if you have a question, we'd love to hear from you. You can check us out online. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching, and until next time, God bless.